Hello, friends. Welcome to another webinar with MHAM and Dr. James Henry. He will be presenting to us today on empathy, compassion, and the gift of being present for those hurting. I'm Kristen Taylor. I'm with the Mental Health Association in Michigan, and we're excited to have Dr. Henry with us again. If you would like to view any of our past webinars with Dr. Henry, please feel free to go out to our YouTube channel. So, Dr. Henry, I'm going to introduce you the way that you always tell me to introduce you and simply say, Jim loves kids. So, everyone, welcome Dr. Henry.
Thanks, Kristen. So I am Jim Henry, and I am someone who's always loved kids. And so I'm honored to be here to talk about compassion, empathy, and just really recognizing what it means to be present. And so my hope is to pull some different sources to really better understand compassion, but also really want to start with that compassion starts with ourselves, and meaning how do I and am I compassionate with who I am as a person, and then as it flows out from me. So we'll try to integrate that throughout. The other part of this is I have the privilege and honor to sit with kids almost every week, and now somewhere around 7,000 kids in the last 26 years, from CTAC, where I was at, to FASTER, to lots of work in Colorado with kids who have killed. And what I've learned is no matter how much I know in terms of intellectually in my prefrontal cortex, really what makes a difference is what and how I bring my heart to the meeting, to meet their hearts, to be able to embrace them. So I really want to kind of talk a little bit about the difference between empathy and compassion, and talk about some ways in which we have the opportunity to expand ourselves as well as expand that space around someone, and being able to, and I use this word alleviate, not in the sense of wipe clean, meaning alleviate suffering, but rather to be able to join them in their moving from it's only about me and what's happened to me to now someone else is holding it with me. And that research will tell us that then brings this shift from the person from I'm alone. I sat with a little girl on Friday who's 14 and has had significant trauma in her life, complex trauma, and was sexually abused by an older adoptive brother for several years. And one of the things she said to me is, it just is, I'm all alone, and it doesn't feel like anybody believes me. And it often feels like I've been betrayed because my family doesn't believe me either. And so alleviating her suffering is not trying or even thinking that somehow I can take away the events that have been harmful to her, but rather that I can hear them, hold them, not be afraid of them, go into them with her, so that she feels this experience of being understood in a way that he, in this case, myself, has created a context that he understands what it's like inside of me. And those of you who've seen me speak before on this series, in a sense, is knowing that when we can feel understood, as John O'Donohue, the poet, would say, we are at home. And that home means and translates into safety. And so in this way, trying to be able to provide that for anyone we sit with, whether it's in the context of our work environment and people we serve, certainly as human service professionals, and also just within our own family and friends. So that's my hope today. I'm going to speak for a bit, then certainly entertain questions. I certainly have appreciated the questions that some of you who've been on before have asked, to really kind of drill down, because, this hope is to move beyond just what I know to who I am, and then who you are and what that looks like as to discovering and growing. So that's how I'm going to start. We'll start with a definition. See. Okay, I'm going to start with this definition. And again, let me go into this. I was afraid that okay. So I'm going to start with this picture, and it's called the Weeping Buddha. And when we first started our trauma center 23 years ago, I got this wooden, very small, in your hands Buddha that then is leaning over with this weeping and this kind of sign of suffering in the world. And those of you who know Buddhism knows that one of the first noble truth is life is suffering. And certainly whether we're Buddhist or Christian or some other non-denominational faith or have no faith, that we know that there's suffering. And so this happens to be, I was in a conference for our grant in Washington, and this is like a 5-foot statue of a weeping Buddha. And I just sat there, and it conveyed visually and certainly in my body this kind of angst that after doing this now for 34 years of working with kids and families and adults who have trauma, that this overwhelming deep sadness. And when we think about this, even from the Christian faith, when we talk about Jesus, and one of the lines is Jesus wept, all right? And so as we think about suffering and who we are in the world, we have these models of people who embrace it and offer that space of connection in that. So when we're looking at this, we want to start with empathy. So empathy is when we can feel with the other person. So what does that mean? And then I'll do part 2. So feel with the other person means that when somebody's feeling sadness or anxiety, we can begin to actually have that our own feeling of sadness and anxiety, not theirs, but our own internal awareness of what that is like. And so empathy is what someone feels that I might feel as well. And so that can have what we call empaths. Those of you who are aware of that word, is that there are people that, through their development, through their early childhood, through their developmental phases, that they've developed this capacity to feel. And so when others cry, they might cry. Or when you're feeling someone and they're sharing, that in your body you feel it. I know for me, I feel sadness as a lump in my throat. And so often when I sit with kids, and literally this young girl that I saw on Friday, about halfway through, I had a lump that I was very aware of. And that's that empathy, feeling her desperation, her grief, her aloneness, and what that must be like for her as she's struggling to find a place to belong. There's 2 kinds of empathy, and this is the kind of real separation. So one that I've been talking about is called affective empathy. Affective empathy is you feel it, just as I just described it. The other type of empathy is cognitive empathy. And cognitive empathy means I can tell you what Kristen may be feeling, but I can't feel it myself. And so I can appreciate that somebody might be sad or angry or fearful. And in that way, I can talk about it, but I can't feel it. And often that lack of feeling really compromises cognitive empathy into not affecting my actions. So what I mean by that is when we have affective empathy, I don't want to hurt, in this case, Kristen, because I care, and then I can feel her hurt of what I've done. If I don't have that, then it's just objectified. It's just, well, that could hurt her, but the impact of my actions don't mean nearly as much because I can't feel that. And often kids with early attachment issues have trouble with empathy. I was just talking to one of my clinicians, and a boy that I just finished a report on this weekend who's 16 and has had some significant trauma in his life, but he's also had several delinquent acts of harm to others. And in writing the report, I could just feel it inside of me that he can tell me what somebody else feels, but he can't feel that. And so consequently, he's had some serious aggressive acts that really haven't impacted him in the sense of what that has done to somebody else. So when we're really trying to talk about ourselves as human service professionals and as parents or family members, how do we open ourselves and have that opportunity for another to, quote, be with, all right? So when we're talking about compassion, we feel for the other, but it's a call to action. It's a call to reduce. And again, and I don't mean fix, and I don't mean that we can eliminate suffering by any means, but reduce so that that would advance the well-being of others. And so in terms of this girl that I was telling you about, I saw on Friday, that, my hope was that I would leave there and that she would have that experience of, I'm not crazy. Somebody believes me about the sexual abuse, and I don't feel so alone. And so that's a reduction of suffering in being able to move out from it's just me to now it's us. And as a basic human need we all have inherently is that need for relatedness, connectedness. And so as we have that, then there's this shared experience of something happened to me, meaning, but it also knowing that it's affecting and other people are with me and it's affecting them as well. So compassion is the call to action. And it's motivated out of that empathy, motivated out of that awareness of what somebody else might be feeling, and my desire to be able to provide for them the space to begin to heal. So when we're looking at this, Jack Kornfield, who is a Buddhist teacher, but also a psychotherapist and written several books, has this phrase that I just think is so powerful. Compassion is love that meets pain. And what does that mean? Well, love is my openness of my heart to someone else. I don't have to know them well, but I can offer that universal care, that universal love, and that it meets the pain. And so in doing that, I break down my own self-protection of avoidance. One of our cultural challenges is that in our culture, we have this aversion to pain. And so avoidance becomes the way in which we cope with it. Again, I'm going back to this little girl that I sat with Friday, and adoptive parents couldn't manage the impact of that pain. And so instead, they just avoided and pretended it didn't happen, nor did they talk about it with the girl. And so that overwhelm of I can't go to the pain, and therefore then the other person internalizes it as it must be about me and that there's something wrong with me. So compassion is our own willingness to go outside ourselves. It's our own act to choose to enter into another's world, to reduce that pain and not be afraid of it. And too often, even as human service professionals, we deal with this day in, day out. We really need our own support network to be able to do that, because then pain can mount, all right? And I've often told our clinicians, CTAC and now at Faster, that we've got a process after we sit with kids and families, because if we don't, then it stays in us and we move into self-protection. I don't want to feel that hurt again. And it's only when we can talk about it, when we can name what that feeling is, that we can then allow it to grieve through us and then be present the next time. And so that really takes this inner work and certainly the outer work of having community to be able to do that. So as we look at this, kind of taking just what I said, in order to be compassionate, willing to embrace our own grief and the grief of others. And I think this is a really important statement about our own grief. Often we may think of ourselves as compassionate to others, but are we compassionate to ourselves? Do I give ourselves, and I always love the word grace, grace in that kind of willingness to be human and to realize that Jim fails, Kristen fails, each of us fail in ways, and each of us have hurt people, and each of us have done something that we wish we hadn't have done, many things. And so embrace that grief that comes with that awareness and still feel loved and cared for and valued and worthwhile and lovable. And so this kind of understanding that our grief then builds our capacity to meet others people's grief. And in that way, that's not something that we can do professionally. That's something that we start and have to do with our own sense of being human. And this real shifting that, okay, in my role, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, and show you a picture that in the role I can do something and gives me the opportunity, but how I do it is where it becomes my humanness. And as I say here in this next bullet, Buddhism has this great phrase that no one in the whole world is more equal to needing love than you. And I really believe that, because we can quickly, and the folks I work with often self-condemn. And as this girl did to me on Friday, crying that there must be something wrong with me, because then why would this happen? And so, but really trying to offer that compassion to reverse or to shift that thinking in a way that you deserve this. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So I was telling you about this role versus humanness, and this is obviously a slide graphic that kind of helps me anyways to kind of tease out what it's like for us as doing this work. And so in one sense, I'm going to go to the left side first. And on one side, our professional role. So I have a status, I have a set of expertise, I have protection with where I work, I have power, I have a series of tasks. And so that gives me opportunity in terms of meeting with others to be compassionate. Just because I'm in this role, no way means I'm going to be compassionate at all. That's where the second half of this comes in terms of my humanness. And so Jim Henry as a person is, okay, so how do I lead with compassion, openness? How do I be humble? I want to learn from you. And again, those of you who've heard me speak and the other ones know that, my most kind of treasured line when I sit with kids and certainly their parents is, you're the expert of your experience. And I want you to teach me what it's like to be you, or teach me what you think's going on for your child. And so we want to learn from them. Nowhere is it anyway a positive when we operate from we know and you don't. That's this kind of very linear versus a reciprocal where I'm learning from you and hopefully you're learning from me as well. And that's being humble in that way, that I can learn from you despite whatever education or experience I have. The other is mutual understanding. And being human, we seek to understand the other beyond behaviors. And I think this is where it's really challenging, because we can quickly, especially when we work with kids, think of them as their behaviors. And then we get judgmental. We can't appreciate what it's like to be them, but rather what their behaviors and how they're affecting us and what we have to do to eliminate them, versus understanding their internal experience. That's a real journey. And that's where compassion, which provides presence, really begins. And then there are our vulnerability. I'm willing to hurt. And I mean that very sincerely. I'm willing to feel something in my body, feel something in my heart, because I've been open to hearing not only the facts, but what and how those facts impacted that child or adult. And so I know I'm going to be vulnerable and feel if I open to building this bridge over to that person, in which then I expand my own sense of self, but I have to be willing to be vulnerable. A poet, Irish poet named David White, talks about radical vulnerability. And I love that term in saying that, again, how do we continue to become aware of what's happening for us and offering at a place of strength vulnerability versus weakness? I had a boy tell me about 3 weeks ago, he said, well, I can't show any of my feelings of sadness or tears because other people will see me as weak. And that is a mind frame. And certainly that comes with adolescence, but also comes with gender, because unfortunately males are very much like that, but also culturally. I've got to hide what I'm feeling. And yet, if we're being whole and we're living in what we would call a heart-head connection, we certainly are going to have that vulnerability. And ultimately, then there's meaning. All our work, one of the things I really appreciate about the work that I do is it gives me meaning. I've always thought and continue to feel day in, day out, that this opportunity to be with kids, to be with adults, to be in there and with their families and offering them a way to, quote, love themselves, offering them a way to love each other is great meaning and that purpose in life. And so part of what's happening when we're human, it moves us out of those. I completed my task to know I gained great meaning from that. It was interesting. About 3 years ago, we went across Michigan and did secondary trauma training to all the counties at DHS in Michigan. And 90% of the folks felt that their work was meaningful. And I said, well, what a place to start. We've got to do something to capitalize. If I think my work is meaningful, I'm going to take the extra step. I'm going to continue to put forth effort, even when it's difficult, because there's some value coming back and to say, this is a calling. This is who I am. And it provides that meaning. So just wanting to be able to say in talking about compassion that that's the human piece. And as I've said before, we can't have relationships with a role. I'm in my role. That's not a relationship with a person. I can't have a relationship if I'm human. And these characteristics being part of my humanness. And do I lead with that to provide then that space of connection? In that opportunity to have that person feel heard and seen. So when we're looking at this, there's this kind of twofold. I'm going to do these next 3 slides, and then we will kind of talk about, or if you have questions, certainly please put them in the chat box or raise your hand at the time. So we talk about the outer level of suffering. And so how potentially some of us do the work of working with the homeless or those that are sick or have basic needs and how to meet those. And being willing to address those that are seemingly outcasts. And I say that word outcast strongly because oftentimes people are judged by their level of income, their homelessness, their poverty, how they look, and this great act. One of the things I like about one of the things that Jesus said was, have you fed me? Have you given me shelter? Right? That I need to know because this gospel is about love, right? And so, what are those outward things that communicate? I want to help meet some of those needs that you can't meet yourself. So this being willing not to judge and condemn, but how to be able to move into and connect with and offer ways to alleviate that. The other is this, the second level of suffering is the inner layer. And that inner layer comes from feeling that you're not okay, that nobody cares, or don't feel that sense of being lovable. There's something fundamentally wrong and it's lacking in me. And this kind of suffering, as it says, can be all pervasive. And so many of us feel at the core of our being that we're not okay, as that young girl I was just telling you about said to me on Friday. And I think that as we talk about and understand, this really takes the heart and soul of compassion is entering into that, because to hear somebody say, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthwhile, there is something wrong with me. We want to react to that and cognitively say, no, that's not true, rather than honoring so many things have happened to you. And of course, you're hurt. And of course, it feels like it must be me. And yet, there's other things to know that when those things happen, we feel like it's our fault, when in fact, it's from what happened, not who we are in that. And so this idea, this inner layer of suffering. So to do this, I wanted to show you this. I did this last week with a 16-year-old girl, and she came in very kind of dramatic and saying, I really don't like coming. And so I'm very used to that, and said, of course you don't want to come. What do I have to do? What are you going to make me do? All these things. And when I said to her that I just want you to help me because you're the expert of your brain, she said to me, nobody's ever said that to me. And so this kind of the initial shift to be able then to help me understand her world, but not only just to understand it, but to enter it with her. So one of the things, and this board kind of talks about it after we did some testing, and the testing was very interesting because we do a IQ screener, and it's short, but it really gives good scores that are very consistent with the WISC, which is kind of the gold standard. Anyway, she kept looking at, what if I put down right or wrong, 1 or 0, and she kept questioning. And so we got to the end, and she said, I really want to know what my score is, because my grandma, who I'm living with, calls me retarded all the time. And I don't know if I'm retarded. I don't know. And so I could feel her pain. And so I knew her score was going to be in the average range because I've done so many of them. And so I did it, scored it, and just said, you're right solid in the average. That's a really good score. And there was this kind of relief to her, talking about alleviating the suffering of there's something wrong. Well, no, I have average intelligence. And so that's a positive. So just thinking about being with her fear and what that was, and no wonder, okay? It explained all her behaviors as to having look at everything I circled because she needed to get them right. So this is the board. I use boards to kind of give kids visuals. And so the question was, what are the 3 things that have had the most impact in your life, events? And so she said, when I was raped at 14 by my ex-boyfriend, when I was in the hospital at 9 and they gave me 15 shots because I was suicidal and because it was a reaction to the medicine, and then drugs. And she introduced herself to me as we went on as an alcoholic. And at 16 now, she's had 5 minor impossessions of alcohol charges. All right. So you see this kind of way in which she copes to self-medicate, and this kind of feeling and realizing it's all connected to what's happened to me. The other part of this was that she was raised by her grandma, and mom and dad basically abandoned her. And so she has these ongoing fears of being abandoned. So when we talked about the impact, okay, because I didn't want to go into the events, I just a couple words, okay, here's the event, but how is that continuing to ripple? And one of the things that she said, or several of the things, that I can't trust people, I'm not safe in my body, I can't trust men, people are going to hurt me. And then, because I've sat with so many kids, I said, sometimes kids feel like they did something, and that's why this happened. And she said, yes, absolutely, that I feel like it's my fault. All right. So those are the alleviate that inner suffering that now I'm not worthy. And one of the things she said, and you can see it on the right there, it's kind of outlined down about third of the page or the poster board is, she said, I felt and feel that I was set up to fail the day I was born. Okay, that was her statement to me. And again, you could just feel the grief in that. I felt that, all right? And then as she started talking about the drugs, and how drugs helped her, and you can see at the bottom there, life is finally beautiful, and the gaping hole in my heart is covered when I use drugs and when I use alcohol. And so this kind of recognition and appreciation that, again, it's harmful to her. She knows that. But what are the ways that I can fill that? And to me, part of being compassionate is somebody else is willing to enter that with you and give you language to normalize how come and not judge, but respond in a way that says and sees the value in that person. The last thing I'll say about this is at the very bottom, you'll see it. It's, I said, I got to think there's lots and lots of sadness that you have, but it doesn't come out that way. Because she said, no, it doesn't, but I have it. And she said, every molecule in my body is sad. Okay. And yet people just think I'm mad. And because that's how it comes out. And I think, again, being compassionate is I want to enter that sadness because that is under it. The mad, and how do we embrace that in that way then that gives, again, a space to be held, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I am going to stop there and ask for questions or thoughts for anybody if you want. If you don't have any, that's fine, but certainly want to give you a moment to reflect if you'd like.
There's nothing in the chat either, Dr. Henry.
Okay. Well, please feel free as we talk to write something or just a comment, reflection, how that fits for you as we talk about understanding compassion and how it then changes us and gives the other person an opportunity to feel connected with. So as we look at this, so as we look at this next question or statement, a lot of the Buddhist texts, and this was from Father Gregory Boyle, who I mentioned last time when I was on the webinar, who is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles. That's the largest gang rehabilitation center in the world, and they have multiple jobs that folks work together who are in rival gangs. And but he talked about seeing everyone there that he works with in this phrase of, "Oh, nobly born, remember who you really are." And as he said, I think that's what happens at Homeboys. We want you to remember who you really are. And I think about that poster I just showed you of that girl from a week ago. I think in terms of talking about the girl last Friday and her experience, and the boy that obviously is struggling with delinquency, and really moving at that inner label of moving to, oh, nobly born, remember who you really are as a beautiful person, as somebody who is lovable, as somebody who has much to contribute. And so we're seeing through those eyes, and that's what compassion eyes see the other person as, not what they've done, not what other people say they are, but seeing something that we believe based upon who we are and what we know, that they are nobly born, and remembering who they are. So just really kind of a shifting becomes really important in this process as we look at and try to understand who other people are underneath what we see. So I'm going to move this 1 minute because it's now stuck. See if I can move it back. Okay. Okay. So one of the things I'll talk about as I try and mess with this to see if I can get it to work. There we go. that goes with "O Nobly Born" is that we're all called as enlightened witnesses. And this again is from Gregory Boyle. And I love that term, enlightened witnesses. So I'm not seeing the outer, I'm seeing the inner and that beauty of what's in there, that light, as James Baldwin would say, that light. I can reflect back to that person. And then through our kindness and tenderness, focus on that intent of love to help people return to themselves. And doing this work, I think it's really, really important that we not confine our compassion to those who are only victimized, but also those who may have done the harming or the offending. And so this is this kind of universal compassion. It sometimes is much easier when we hear and sit with a victim of what's happened. It's much more difficult when that victim becomes an offender. And in that offending, they have harmed somebody. But how do we continue to be an enlightened witness of what's beyond what we see and go there with kindness and help them to see that themselves? And this is one of my favorite quotes because I think this talks about the grief that when we see that deep sorrow and how that sorrow is turned for this one girl into alcoholism, significant drug use, for this other boy, delinquency. This quote from this book called The Wild Edge of Sorrow says, "The work of a mature person is to carry grief hand in hand with gratitude and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow I can hold, that's how much gratitude I can have." And so this is that kind of idea of holding sorrow and gratitude, of being able to be with, because that is a gift, as we would call sacred moments of shared experience, of human to human. And so as we talk about how I can be stretched, that I'm in this process of growing as well. If it only becomes linear, in other words, I'm here to help you, and you're the one who's, quote, going to change and grow, then it's not reciprocal and it's not gratitude. It's just doing. And so when we shift our mind to the value of this work, this call that we all have, then we begin to see how that affects me in my own sense of gratitude about my life and what's in my life. And I think that as we do this, we continue to know that that's how we live in our work and in our home life. One of the things when we work with people with secondary traumatic stress is appreciating that if they've learned to survive by numbing, then that numbing happens at work. But then when that person goes home, that numbing stays with them. And so there's a significant loss, a significant grief that in order to survive in the way that I've chosen is to numb. And so in that numbness, what is it lost? What is lost is that joy and the beauty of the connection, not only to my family, but also to others with whom that I serve. So just really love this idea of this holding both, this gratitude and grief. And certainly we know that we get fearful of this ego and to be protected. I don't want that. And so part of that is that this compassion continues to pull us to opening, to be there, to go to places that other people won't go to because of that fear and that protection of that ego. And there's a quote here, and I love this quote, and you've used it often in our team meetings. Compassion opens our hearts as wide as the sky. And so it continues. This is from Rumi, a Sufi poet, and it continues to build us in terms of that availability of our hearts, of our minds, of our souls to others and to those we work with in our community and those with whom we live with in our family. So as we look at this, this is from Gregory Boyle again. It's one of my favorite quotes as we talk about this development and growing. He says, "The measure of our compassion lies not in the service of those on the margins." Remember, he works with gang members, but in our open willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. So what does that mean? So kinship is in this together. kinship is I'm no different than you. Yes, there's an outer shell, there's a layer that may be very difficult to deal with, maybe reactive, but how do I then move my compassion to say we're in this together, in this kinship, that we are human beings trying to live with what's happened and how we're living in this way. So just a really powerful way to think about that idea of kinship. And then the other part of it is this. This is from a theologian, Episcopalian theologian, a universal theologian named Henry Nouwen, and he wrote the book Wounded Healer, which is one of my favorite books. And The Wounded Healer is all about compassion, to say we bring our own wounds to those we serve, and they then serve to open us further. But he says here, when we dare to care, then we discover that nothing human is foreign to us, but that all that hatred and love and cruelty and compassion, fear and joy can be found in our own hearts. And so his message is this thinking about what I look and see in somebody else as repulsive, that how could they do that? There in me lies the seeds that I also have that potential to do that I could also lose that sense of being able to manage those internal moments when I want to rage or do something harmful. But he said that's where we get kinship, where we can see in others ourselves. And in that, he says, to care means, first of all, to empty our own cup and to allow the others to come close to us. It means we take away the many barriers which prevent us from entering into communion with others. And so it's interesting, Henry Nouwen's last years of his life, he worked in a community for disabled folks in France and served them. And it was a community living so that they all lived as together and served those that had disabilities. And, this whole idea of, well, I don't want that. And yet that opens me further, that all of that is also inside of me. And when we dare to care, we have to confess that when others kill, I could have killed too. When others torture, I could have done the same. When others heal, I could have healed too. And when others give life, I could have done the same. And so again, seeing that humanity in all of who we are becomes this entering into that I'm no different from, and in that compassion, in many ways, I'm serving myself as that other. And again, as Buddhist and certainly Gregory Boyle talks about, that ye who are nobly born, how do we engage and see that? And then we experience that we can be present to the soldier who kills, to the guard who pesters, to the young man who plays as if life has no end, and the old man who stopped playing out of fear of death. And I thought about this when I sat with this girl on poster, the one I showed you last week, and just this kind of bravado that she had, and this kind of self-protection. And slowly we peeled away the layers, as you saw some of those on the board, that then what's underneath is just this deep hurt and grief and self-condemnation, and entering into that she allowed me to do that, to hold that some of that with her, is certainly what we would define as sacred moments. And that's this transcending roles, connecting human to human in our hearts, and that we have the privilege of connecting with each other's vulnerability, the hurt, and is felt in kinship with a soul-to-soul moment. And those are those moments that then we breathe in and say, thank you for being with me and sharing. That we breathe in to say, thank you because you've expanded my own heart and helped me to learn what it means to really be in kinship. That we don't separate ourselves as better or we're good, you're bad, which is the dichotomy certainly of our culture, but we embrace you in your hurt and realize that hurt people, as Sandra Bloom would say. So if you look at this from a diagram form as a me to you, there's this each of it in our own worlds. And part of what comes together when we do our work or we make an initiative to be compassionate is that then they begin to intersect. They don't engulf each other, they don't become one, but they intersect. And in this intersection is this sacred space of we shared something about who we are, have it held, honored, and then reflect back that they, and certainly ourselves, can see more of the light of who we were meant to be. And so this is that sacredness. So when that happens, I'm always deeply thankful and have that gratitude because we can create that willingness to go to that place. As that girl said, nobody's ever asked me that before. Or all I want to do, Jim, is to be understood in a way that embraces me, not understood in the way that there's something faulty. And being compassionate means embracing in that moment of tenderness that then I see you for who you were meant to be. So this Ostensky is a hospice leader, is Zen hospice in San Francisco, and obviously works for the dying. So when he talks about compassion being an inner God, I really like this idea that it'll take us to the place we need to go when that exact face of suffering reveals itself, because it's the act of being present, so that there's no expectations other than I'm here, I'm holding, I'm seeing, I'm hearing you. And as death approaches, and then all of us have had death in some way in our lives, that we are there to hold that person as they leave their bodies and give them that permission to leave and to start the next part of the journey, whatever that might be, in a way then that by being present, we can be flexible and offer them what they do need, not what we think they need. And that's a real hard part, especially when you work with kids, because in this idea of, well, I know what you need because I'm the adult, it's really a shifting to you helping me, even though you're a kid, to tell me what you think you need. And that awareness then is empowering. And compassion is this opening to empowerment that the other person feels that they then have a direction and a belief that someone thinks they can. And then this one, and I've talked a little bit about it, but I don't want to not emphasize it again, is the attuning to the underlying suffering of another, that we then hold the story so they're not alone. And I think that this, we've come more and more to realize over time that then this story now becomes our story, that then you're not holding this alone. And as I said in the beginning, as we started in holding this, that you're holding it with someone, it's relieved some of the weight of that I can share, that I can experience desperation, but that person isn't afraid of my desperation, but they are there and we're holding this in this moment of not, again, erasing, but alleviating the suffering where the person internalizes it as their fault. Now, that doesn't mean that we say to folks, well, I just want to tell you it's not your fault. No, it means this, that I want to hold this with you and I can't imagine the pain that you're going through. And I thinking and knowing that it's not you who did this, but that's not what you think and know. And I want to be with what you think and know, but I want you also to know what it is that I'm thinking. So, because sometimes, especially when we work with kids, we immediately go to, well, it's not your fault. And they kind of say this over and over. But often, most often, when I talk with kids, they say, well, I know they say that, but I don't believe that. And what we've done is minimize what they're experiencing, because that's how they make meaning of things. And kids in that egocentric way is when something happens, it must be something that I brought on myself. And I think this statement is, this again, this comes from Gregory Boyle, but one that really speaks to compassion. We stand in awe at what the poor have to carry rather than in judgment how they carry it. And this, when I read this, it was profound to me that, we stand in awe of, look at how you've lived through this and how you're attempting to carry rather than, well, you haven't carried it well. And so that compassion is going to that inner space of awe that appreciates and recognizes what and who that person is in what they're doing. There's an interesting, homeless people have a way to engender fear in people, and sometimes in myself as well. And Kalamazoo has a very large homeless population. And I have a dear friend who's worked with me and known for a long time. And her response is always to go right up to them and talk to them. And she'll sometimes take them for coffee. And it's just this, and I am in awe. And I'll say to her, Kristen, I'm in awe of what and how you do that, because it's what she's seeing in them, not what and how they're living in this moment. And so that's a real gift of challenge to me in that connection, as it can be something that's feared or anxiety provoking, and just how her compassion has moved her to that tenderness. So just the last couple of things, and we'll leave just a couple minutes. We got a few minutes, and then we'll leave a couple minutes for if there's a question or two or a comment. So it says, take off your armor of your own heart and become fully available to embrace the other as self. And so this is that idea of when we get stressed, we constrict. And when we constrict in our bodies, when we constrict on our brains, we move to the lower part of our brain that then is self-protection and survival. And so that heart is layered often with levels and levels of armor for protection. It was very interesting. Often we do a trust circle, and that girl that I talked about that talks about herself as an alcoholic and all she's been through. And so when I asked her, does she have anybody in the center of her circle that she can trust 100%? And she said, only my cat, right? And literally that was the second time in 2 weeks that someone said to me, my cat is the only one that I can trust. And so it's just my cat in the middle of that circle. And so as we think about this, that we embrace, we take off our armor so that we can be fully embrace the other, so as to be able to build that bridge of connection becomes crucial. And then the famous psychiatrist Carl Jung, it's one's own hurt that gives the measure of power to our ability to connect. And I really believe that, to say, how do we hold our own pain and then experience it as the pain, moving from my pain to the pain. And when we can embrace the pain, that we all have that suffering, as I started with the weeping Buddha, that then it becomes something we join in. And that compassion opens us, as I said, as wide as the sky. So, gives us meaning and purpose. I just want to share this. This is something that I do every day. And it's somewhat of a prayer. It's a meditation, and it's called metta, which metta means loving kindness. And loving kindness is kind of referred to as the love of a parent has of their child. So it's this unconditional care. And so there are different forms of meditation with loving kindness, but I like this one. And so what it is you start with someone that you love close, then you move to a friend, then you move to someone as acquaintance, then you move to somebody who's causing you stress, then you may move to somebody who you've pushed out of your circle and don't trust at all. And you have these continuous kind of mantra, may you be well, may you be at peace, may you be free from suffering, and may you be full of loving kindness. And so often when I'm sitting with kids or adults, I'll use this meditation for the person I'm sitting with as a way to open myself further. again, that light of compassion, that I can see their light as I'm wishing them well, no matter what and how they've lived their life, but wanting to be able to provide that place, again, that kind of sacred space of connection. So I want to read this last one and then we'll stop it because I really like this, and I'll close with this. And this is again from Gregory Boyle. At Homeboy, which again is the multiple places of work they have, bakery and tattoo removing and machine shop. It says at Homeboy, our experience is that suffering gets alleviated in community with, and you see these words, extravagant tenderness. Tenderness becomes the connective tissue. Softness. How do we soften? I didn't use that word, but I love that word, soften. Softening our hearts to make this tenderness of connective tissue. Some tenderness is where you meet people. It becomes mutual, where I'm not saving you. I'm not interested. Even I'm serving you. I'm allowing or trying to be with you. Then it becomes mutual and life-giving. Tenderness is a sort of thing for me right now. So again, I think as we talk about how we do our work, and that work doesn't have to be seen as just professional, but our work in this life, and live out our call, whatever that might be. But then talking about this tenderness of joining, tenderness of seeing that, oh, nobly born, and tenderness of providing that opportunity to be seen and to be heard. And so it is mutually life-giving because I said, is that sacred space, I'm changed, not just the person with whom I've been assigned to or what he or she may expect from me, but rather what and how I create that compassionate living that embraces them fully. So I'm going to stop there. Any comments or thoughts, reflections, questions?
Yeah, there is one from Michelle. She said the role of boundaries is feeling and showing compassion. It's more of a comment to you.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
and
we
I
have
think that,
go
go ahead.
ahead. No,
So I
you go
think,
ahead.
yeah, I've heard that before. And this idea of boundaries is I can be empathic, I can be compassionate. Boundaries get violated when it becomes my need, not their need. All right. So in other words, I do what they need to do for themselves, or it is I'm doing that out of my need, not what they need. One of the things, I have a video of a boy that I did an assessment with, and at the end he says, therapists, think they have the magic cure, and like they're retarded, they can't fix me. He said, I had one therapist who said, it'll be okay. And he said, I walked out. You can't tell me it'll be okay. That's a violation of a boundary to say it'll be okay because you don't know it's going to be okay. How do we sit with that boy, knowing his confusion, knowing what he wants, and also to be able to hold the story with him and the challenges. So we oftentimes, when we talk about violation of boundaries, it's then motivated on our need, not the other person's.
She also has a question. Please talk about the role of community in healing and give any examples you have of communities that have learned compassion.
Yes, thank you. I got goosebumps with that question, so thank you so much. So there's a commitment that a community, and that could be a community of people you work with, it could be a community at church, it could be a community of friends, to really be willing to go into the grief, go into the pain, and that we're all going to hold this together. So in other words, I'm going to hear what yours is in this moment. I'm going to share with you what mine is. And together we're going to hold this as our community that feels the wounds of the world and yet simultaneously sees the beauty, as I had said, the gratitude of being able to be with those that share those wounds as a vehicle to be able to make those connections. So probably the best that I can think of is for many years at our trauma center, and still today, when we finish doing an assessment, or oftentimes we'll do multiple assessments at once, at the end, after we get done talking about the children or the adults, what we do is we all go around and share a feeling for the day. And it could be anger, it could be joy, as a great moment with a kid. It could be deep sadness and multiple tears. But what it does is it just validates everyone having this range of feeling based upon what others in the room have, and that then I can be available to them given what my experience was and how I can support them. So it's not mine, it's ours. And I think if I've learned anything in our community as we've built that, is that we can then go the next week to those places that often people don't want to go to because it's too painful. But no, it's not going to happen because I am going to go because it does open me, but also I'm not bearing that by myself. And that's an example of a community that I've seen develop over the last 15 years as we moved from, quote, being experts in trauma to being experts in being able to name and share and hold the impact to us of what's happening so that we can go back week to week and see the beauty in a child or an adult and also hold their woundedness.
Yes. So I apologize if I misunderstood you, but I think you said that, you hear some children say that they are told repeatedly, it's not your fault. And I get that, and I think abused women or abused anyone often hears that. Is there another way, to say that or get that message across?
Thank you for that. Yes, what I found that's very helpful to kids is, first of all, to validate that, yes, it feels like their fault. Okay. So that, yes, it does. Of course it does. Because why else would this happen if it wasn't for me? If it was somebody else, it wouldn't happen too. And that's how they make sense. That's what trauma does. It distorts perceptions. So first of all, I want to enter into that with that child that validates that experience that it is my fault. Secondly, I want to tell them that I so appreciate how come and how that bad that must feel, but I want to tell you what I think. Now, again, you don't have to believe what I think, but I want you to know, because I think something differently, that then I think that this is not your fault, but I'm not expecting you to believe that, and that's okay. And maybe someday you will, and maybe someday you won't, but I want to appreciate what it feels like for you right now. So that then validates, but it also shares another perspective, and it doesn't dismiss what the child or the adult is experiencing. And that really changes the interaction and changes the space between people in a way then that says, I'm here with you in feeling that it's your fault.
There any other questions for Dr. Henry?
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time, appreciate your work, appreciate your willingness to keep growing, because certainly that's the essence of everything, and that compassionate love and care. So thank you all.
We wish you all a wonderful rest of your day and summer, and blessings to you, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Peace to all.